Bonjour tout le monde et merci à toutes les personnes qui se sont inscrites à notre événement sur l'intelligence numérique collaborative organisé par IVADO. Mon nom est Zoher Malki et je suis conseiller au partenariat et je suis accompagné par ma collègue Laurence Renaud pour animer les 11 différentes conférences qui sont programmées dans cette session sur la compréhension du monde. Le temps est précieux aujourd'hui puisque les présentations s'enchaînent l'une après l'autre. Donc, je ne vais pas hésiter d'indiquer qu'il reste 2 minutes ou c'est le temps de la dernière question. Pour les questions, vous remarquez dans la fenêtre discussion interactive qui apparaît à droite de votre écran un onglet clavardage, questions et sondages. Merci d'utiliser l'onglet questions pour poser les vôtres. Je vous conseille donc de rédiger vos questions en cours de la présentation et ne pas les laisser jusqu'à la fin. Alors, sans plus tarder, je vais introduire le premier conférencier de cette session et ça va être en anglais. I'm pleased to welcome Davis Sawyer from Deeplite. His presentation is titled Small is Big, Bringing AI to Tiny Devices. Davis is a Canadian tech entrepreneur and co-founder and CPO of Deeplite, a Montreal-based AI software startup. Prior to Deeplite, Davis developed statistical models for pharmaceutical safety. Recognized as a C2 Montreal emerging entrepreneur and a Fondica Roadshow finalist in 2018, he brings interdisciplinary startup and industry experience to drive product direction and commercialization strategy. Davis will talk about deep neural networks. As you may know, DNN have become the most common tool for solving complex problems, from DNA sequencing to facial recognition. However, DNNs are huge and require extensive computing power, memory, and expertise to deploy. This talk delves deeper into Deeplite's research and techniques to address the issue of making AI more accessible, affordable, and environmentally friendly. Davis, merci d'être là. The floor is now yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Deeplite. My name is Davis, and as was mentioned in the introduction, today we're going to talk about a really exciting topic that has a lot of relevance to Montreal and the ecosystem at large, which is deep learning, and how can we make this powerful tool more accessible, more affordable, and bring it to the billions of battery-powered devices that exist in the world. So it's my great pleasure today, and thank you very much for joining this morning to share how we are researching in this field and some of the benefits it can bring to the ecosystem at large as we develop further. So let's dive into it, and at the end, I'm happy to take your questions. So a quick background on the company. We are Montreal-based. We're very proud to be have our origins here. We were incubated at the Deep Tech Incubator Tandem launch and launched as a company in 2019. Our headquarters are most certainly in Montreal, but we're also proud that our team is global, locations such as South Korea, France, India, Ontario. So very much bringing the spirit of collaboration globally. And as you can see here, we're part of a number of different consortium, including research hubs, collaborations like IVADO, and of course in automotive as well. So to get into the matter a little bit, what we focus on is how do we use AI to make other AI, specifically deep learning, smaller, faster, and more energy efficient. And while this is relevant across a number of sectors, like you can imagine in automotive or in manufacturing, the reality is that a lot of the potential that deep learning and AI has is really not fully tapped into yet. And what we mean by that is, while specifically there are several barriers to adoption, the one that we focus on most of all, and we think is quite important, is really the efficiency of this powerful tool. How can we bring this predictive intelligence, this really useful level of accuracy to the footprint, meaning both environmental but also memory, battery, cost, of course, cost footprint as well, and make it available in all the cool devices that we have all around us. So the question might be, well, why deep learning at all? And maybe this might be familiar to many of us, but just very quickly, as is increasingly understood, is deep learning has outperformed traditional techniques mainly on the basis that as you increase the amount of data and the size of your deep neural network, or the depth of it in terms of number of layers, you can get better performance. And so This was probably well embodied by the 2012 ImageNet, achievement by the AlexNet team with Hinton and others. And since then, this has been really a race, to get better performance. And now we have things like GPT-3 or these transformer models, which are maybe 100 times, if not 1,000 times more complex than what you see here. And this is really cool because now we can do more interesting things. But at a practical level, we also need to consider what's the cost of adopting this new technology, and most importantly, how can we make it more efficient? So why this is really important is that while many things today are cloud-based, such as many photo applications or many internet-connected devices, for a lot of edge AI processing, and maybe a good example would be autonomous vehicles, we simply can't rely on the cloud because of latency, so how long it takes to make this happen, the cost both in terms of bandwidth, computation, energy, etc. And then really the other two of connectivity and privacy. So the combination of all these things has really awoken us and many others to the reality that why don't we try to take this big deal, deep neural networks, and make it smaller, make it free from this cloud paradigm, untethered from the cloud, and bring it to these edge devices that are literally all around us. And maybe a good example of this, a bit technical, but there are in every home now about maybe 60 what are called microprocessors, and every car maybe has 30 to 100 microprocessors. But the challenge is that being these small processors, they're not fit for a lot of the neural network processing that is cloud-based. And so although we have unprecedented volume, as you see here, more microprocessors exist now than over the last 25 years. The challenge is that we need to somehow catalyze this reaction. And really what this slide is meant to entail is, when we bring together the components such as improved networks, the new processors and sensors like microphones, cameras, of course, and other vibration sensors, the really interesting idea here is that, while deep learning is already a big deal today in the cloud, it can actually be even bigger if we make it, untethered, decentralized, and everywhere. And so that's, I think, one of the really exciting things that we're going to dig in a bit further and give a few examples of how do we make this possible, but also, what are the challenges, what are the use cases, what are some concrete examples of how edge can and will be bigger than cloud processing. And as was mentioned in the beginning, but can't be understated, there's really three pillars of what we're trying to do to achieve that vision of edge being bigger than cloud. The first is the computational complexity. Millions, if not billions, of expensive operations are required for every input. So every single time an image or a piece of text is thrown in a neural network, it has this huge cost that we have to go through to get our prediction. Second of all, memory. I'm sure we're all familiar with having to either delete or remove apps at some point because we simply just consume all the memory. Even though we have more and more memory every year on our devices, the apps get bigger, the files get larger, and so we do need to address simply how much memory we use. And then third is really power. This is important from two levels. One, of course, would be battery-powered devices. So we don't want our batteries to die too fast, or of course for critical equipment, solar-powered equipment, it's a very big issue in terms of how much power. And then also at the macro level, it's really the data center power consumption that's also very important. There's a significant non-trivial impact in terms of CO2 footprint, in terms of the energy costs to power that data center. And so the interesting thing becomes, well, if we could just use the devices that are already around us, such as the laptops and phones, et cetera, well, we could save a lot of power instead of having to, unleash the data center on everything. And the next question I think becomes, so what do we really need in order to make effective AI at the edge? And the first part, which of course is crucial for things that maybe already exist. So maybe we can put a Face ID, for example, on an older phone. But if it's not fast enough, then we really can't use it. And so that's one of the first things that us and a lot of our partners in industry work on is, okay, if we have something that's almost good enough to deploy, we really just need to have faster inference. We need to make it practical enough to deploy. And the second part of that, which has more of an economic sense to it, is if we can get better throughput at the same cost or footprint, well, that's always useful, meaning that, imagine if your car would go, 5 times faster on the same amount of gas. It's really, that straightforward, and that's what a lot of the industry is trying to do to bring all these exciting new features to products and businesses. Uh, the flip side of that, or you're kind of related, is actually making them smaller. So that's really at the essence of this talk is, while deeper neural networks, lead to better performance, and that's been the trend, what's really, maybe counterintuitive, but also quite powerful is, well, what if we made them smaller? And by that we mean, if we could compact them enough, meaning the existing neural networks enough, that they could fit onto devices that are maybe 5, 10, and even in some cases 500 times smaller than what they currently require, well, this has a massive impact because, there's certain physical constraints to certain devices. Form factor is very important. And then again, it really comes down to how do we enable this new technology to be provided and delivered at a cost and a footprint that is practical enough for not just a small amount of people, but almost everyone to experience. And yeah, I'm glad this came up because really at the end of the day, all of this is not helpful if we degrade accuracy too much. So no matter how fast it is, how small it is, if we don't maintain the accuracy, then it can't be used. And that's really the trick here. So just to look at this quickly, and hopefully it's not too much of a technical paradigm, but what we mean by smaller is actually very straightforward. So maybe we're familiar with things like TensorFlow or PyTorch or some of the tools that already exist today. But one of the interesting things that we've seen happen, and we see this roadblock occur a lot when an AI model moves from research to engineering and then into production, is once it goes to this level 1, this level 2 can be incredibly difficult. And as we know, there's a huge shortage of AI talent, especially in the deep learning space. And while that's a good opportunity for the AI and deep learning talent, what it really means is that we have a big barrier in terms of time to solution or time to market for new AI concepts. And one of the biggest hurdles we see a lot of companies face is actually in this level 2, which really means, you need to take someone's time. It can be, I know this is days or weeks, but we've seen even 6 months to take a single neural network and make it this much smaller. And even then, when we go through what are called, low-level optimizations or compilers, which often come from the hardware vendors like CPU and GPU makers, even then, it's still not enough to get to those microprocessors. Again, in any household, any car, there's maybe 30 to 100 of these microprocessors all around us. And so that's the kind of barrier that we're trying to break through here without compromising accuracy, of course. And so we're very proud at Deeplite's team to have some interesting technology, some very powerful research, and also to collaborate, with great researchers like Benjio at Milan with some of his postdoc on really breaking this mold. And so if you were to take the previous slide and introduce, the technology that we've developed at Deeplite, this has been, super exciting for us and super exciting for industry, because what it means is that not only can you break through that barrier and get to the footprint and the size of neural networks that we want to for those microprocessors, but we've put a lot of effort into automating this process. And that, of course, relates to the previous point that we simply cannot afford in many cases the months, if at all, of trial and error that can achieve, an optimized result. And so it might be a subtle point, but automating this process has been a big ambition of ours to make it more accessible and make the technology more available. And just to look at this from the framework of what's called ML ops these days, kind of similar to DevOps, but essentially, because the building blocks of any machine learning application, is of course code, like any software, but really the data as well. And what this means is that the data is kind of a continuous system itself. It can shift, it can evolve, it can change, and understanding how that occurs in the real world is essential to getting a good performance. And so while today, people are certainly building, training, and deploying neural networks, what we've seen to be really promising is really introducing this middle step of this automated model optimization, which has, of course, the benefits of speeding up, this whole process itself with automation, but of course enabling models that are either too big today to fit onto edge. And I think the really, really cool thing that we're seeing happening now is once you do this once, say for example, you take one large model, make it smaller, and now you can fit it onto a smaller processor. Well, more often than not, there's space for another application, another model. And that's where we see, a really cool side effect on the creativity of the industry and the different features they want to roll out is by enabling, more capacity for a second or third AI model and so on and so forth. That's really, I think, the benefit we want to introduce is that you move from what's the AI being done today to the AI that could happen tomorrow. So we'll get into a couple of examples of this in a second, but that's really one of the cool benefits of I think doing what we're doing is that we get to see unlock new ideas that previously just weren't practical. So maybe a quick example of this. We were fortunate to collaborate with a great Canadian company, Blackberry QNX. They provide a real-time operating system, and of course, in vehicles, reaction time is everything. But of course, we need to have reasonable footprint as well. And so we took an AI model that was tasked with detecting cars from live video, and initially it was 15 frames per second. So not quite fast enough for what they needed. And without increasing any hardware, so without having to add more computing, without doing any other tricks or increasing spending like that, purely from software optimization, we're able to get a 3 times boost in video processing, which meant a 20% increase in the car battery life for an electric vehicle. And again, this was done purely with software. And that's, I think, one of the most exciting things here is that, not only is it something that can be achieved in the kind of the training or the development stage of AI, but it's totally complementary to any innovation that happens on the hardware side as well. So really what at the end of the day will happen is as we improve the efficiency of the software and the models and if certainly new hardware, better hardware comes out, well, the two working together really starts to impact the level of performance. So it's a quick example, but hopefully gives an idea of what we mean by that first point of making things faster so that they can be practical. Another example, also automotive related, but wanted to mention an awesome fellow Montreal, Quebec-based company, Esmart Control. We were fortunate to collaborate with them on a really interesting application. Currently they have a really good technology using GPS to detect the speed limit for truck fleets. But as many of us know, in many locations, the speed limits can change, and specifically we're thinking of things like construction zones. And so again, probably a lot of us know many places in Montreal are always under construction. And so the challenge is, sometimes GPS and like many things, the information we have can be out of date. And so their idea, which was really cool, was to introduce a camera to complement their existing solution. So GPS and camera working together to give more accurate real-time information about the speed limit and dynamically adjust. But the challenge was, the neural networks to do this were just way too large to fit on their existing processor. Again, we already have a device out there. It's really a challenge of making AI fit into that device instead of making that device fit the AI model. And that's really the paradigm that you've seen a lot of existing vendors be interested in, is because in many cases, it's just impractical to try and to change, the physical parameters of something. Whereas if you could just squeeze, the software application into it, which is of course where we're coming from, well, then it makes things a lot easier to adopt and a lot more straightforward. This is another cool application that we're excited to launch soon. Maybe as one last example here, this is something that we published with our partner from Taiwan, Andes, last year. This is more in the consumer space, so maybe a lot of us are familiar with products like Alexa or OK Google. But one of the kind of challenging things with that is when you constantly have to collect audio and send all that audio to the cloud and then say, hey, are these the words I want, and then send it back, that has a massive cost at scale. And so one of the interesting things for some of these new products is, well, what if there's just a little tiny kind of dumb camera that's all it's there to do on this little microprocessor is just when a person's around, just wake up. And that saves a lot of battery, it saves a lot of power, because you don't have to be always on. It's kind of more like how humans actually operate, in that we go from kind of this system 1 to system 2, and we can spare a lot of energy by not having to kind of be always on. And that's the idea here. So a lot of these new motion detection products or assistant products are taking on this kind of technology to be just more efficient and also have more capacity to do more complex things in the future. And so working with the team, we're able to do I think this is really cool. We were able to do person detection using a neural network with only 130 kilobytes of memory. So it's like a Word document. That's an incredibly compact size to be doing something as complex as detecting a person from a camera, something that, even a few years ago was just, it wasn't possible. So that's a cool example to us. And maybe as we kind of wrap up here and get into the questions in a moment, we do want to zoom out a little bit from where we focus at Deeplite and try to look at the bigger picture here of, how are things really evolving in the space. And I think Intel Capital gave a really great summary of the AI infrastructure stack. And so, well, of course, we're focused on that small is big paradigm that, we want to automate, we want to make things more efficient and optimize them. Really, I think the cool thing to look at as an industry, and just for the curiosity of everyone else, there is an endless amount of problems to solve in this space right now. And so, of course, being biased, we do think the energy efficiency and the size of neural networks is probably one of the best problems to solve. The reality is that any serious production grade solution takes on a complementary stack of the complementary vendors and technologies that exist in the space. And so we just want to highlight that right now we are certainly focused on what's called this level 6 automation here. Again, augmenting the scarce AI talent, making their lives easier, making the development of products easier with our optimization. That's really our focus. But we are certainly, as it says here, we're going into what's called the software accelerator space, which is getting closer to the hardware. We're doing a lot of cool collaborations with major chip companies around this because, as I mentioned earlier, it's really, you might think software and hardware fight each other, but really when the two work together, that's where the magic happens. And so just to wrap up here, there's really three takeaways at the end of the day from this talk. The first is unlocking new opportunities by making DNNs applicable for sensor edge, really any edge really, but by sensor edge, it's really that tiny device footprint where if we could take these massive neural networks and bring them really as close as possible to the data source, so hence the sensor, if we can get it to the data source as close as possible, well, that's where we see the biggest impact in terms of cascading more potential, more capacity to do AI. Second,
Davis, one minute left. Yeah.
Thank you. No problem. This is my last slide. Second last. The second of all, reducing time to market. So we want to make the engineering effort, the manual effort, reduce as much as possible to help AI experts in their development. And then third, which was mentioned a couple of times, ultimately we want to enable more AI. That's really the exciting time I think we're in as an industry, is that we're just at the beginning, we're just scratching the surface, and we can't wait to see how much things change in the next couple years plus. So on that note, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, IVADO, for inviting us and having us present today. Thank you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Davis, for this first presentation. It was really interesting. Now it's question period. I will see if there is any. I don't see any question at the moment. J'invite tous les assistants de poser leurs questions malgré la neige d'aujourd'hui. Davis aura le plaisir de vous répondre.
Merci.
De questions pour le moment, comme on arrive à la fin de la période. Donc, je te remercie, Davis, pour ta présentation. Et je dis à toutes les personnes qui sont présentes d'aller voir les autres présentations pour notre programme d'aujourd'hui qui est très attractif et très riche. Merci à tout le monde.